Good morning, my name is Araceli Galiano and I am a professor at the University of Cadiz, Spain, in the Marketing and Communication Department. First of all, I would like to thank SciTech Central for the opportunity to participate in the SciTech Management Conference 2020. This paper that I am going to present has been carried out by Juan José Mier Franco and me, and it is entitled The Use of Social Digital Networks by NGDO from a Social Marketing Perspective. It is about to know which are the social marketing messages characteristics in NGDO social media to get the most reaction from the public. The presentation is structured in the following sections. First, an introduction, and then objectives, hypotheses, methodology, results, and conclusions. Nowadays, digital social networks have become virtual instruments to facilitate co-creation, collective knowledge, and confidence. Their content can be enriched with multimedia elements. These characteristics, together with the interaction, immediacy, and public character of the conversations, have made social digital networks a critical component of development marketing strategies. This is also an expected phenomenon that has not gone unnoticed by development NGOs. That means NGDOs. For these organizations, social networks offer two types of advantages. On the one hand, they are low-cost resources and do not require extensive knowledge. On the other hand, they are an excellent way to network with other people in similar organizations to know what is said about them on the internet and to communicate content to donors, volunteers, and partners. But there is evidence that NGDOs do not take advantage of their full potential. This could be because they have unrealistic expectations about audience participation, do not properly manage these activities, and do not have appropriate online marketing strategies. In this sense, organizations should focus their efforts on understanding the use of social digital networks. In this digital environment, social marketing can go beyond creating awareness and changing behaviors. That means that NGDOs must get users to talk about the social causes on social networks for the information to become viral. In this sense, we focus this study on social marketing communication posts from Facebook and Twitter. There are several studies that analyze this digital phenomenon in these kinds of entities. Most studies focus on user behavior related to social digital networks, SDN, and non-profit organizations. But some works focus on the impact of SDN as effective marketing or communication tools. For example, researches from Q Saxton, Lovejoy and Saxton, etc. However, there is little evidence of the social media communication profiles of NGDOs. Hence, the interest in studying these profiles and the reaction from the public or interactions of the messages posted on Facebook and Twitter by NGDOs. We pretend to respond to the following research questions. What kind of messages published by NGDO on Facebook and Twitter cause a greater reaction from the public? And how can NGDOs to increase the reaction from the public of their Facebook and Twitter messages through social marketing? To answer these questions, the messages published by Caritas, Asidonia Jerez, and Red Cross Cadiz on Facebook and Twitter, as well as the reaction from the public, has been analyzed. The reaction from the public has been measured by the sum of likes plus the number of shares for each post. The objectives are the following. Objective 1, to elaborate communication profiles from the points of view of the public and of the organizations, depending on the purpose, the theme, and the quality of the message. Objective 2, to analyze the reaction from the public or interactions of the messages according to the previous parameters. In other words, it is argued that the reaction from the public to publications in the aforementioned social networks depends on the purpose, the theme, and the quality. We have proposed the following hypotheses. Hypothesis 1, related to the purpose. The purpose of the message, information, dialogue, or behavior influences the public's reaction on Twitter and Facebook. Hypothesis 2, related to the theme. The reaction of the public is different depending on the theme of the message on Twitter and Facebook. Hypothesis related to the quality. Hypothesis 3, the reaction of the public is different depending on the type of format used in the message on Twitter and Facebook. Hypothesis 4, the number of mentions and hashtags influences the reaction of the public on Twitter and Facebook. And hypothesis 5, the reaction of the public depends on the link in each message on Facebook and Twitter. In order to carry out the research, the NGDOs, Caritas Asidonia Jerez, and Red Cross Cadiz, which have the largest number of delegations in the province of Cadiz, have been considered. Also, these organizations are registered in the Spanish Development Cooperation Agency. That means AECID. The main organization oriented towards the eradication of poverty and sustainable human development. To be registered in AECID is a guarantee of operating transparency. Besides, Caritas and Red Cross Cadiz are part of the organizations named by the AECID as qualified. That is, they have passed an accreditation process that certifies their experience and capacity. The social media selected are Facebook and Twitter, two of the most popular social networks in Spain, as shown in the IEB Spain reports. From 2008 to 2018, a period in which the percentage of users of the social networks grew from 51% to 85%. The study carried out by Soria revealed that 70% of the NGOs use the internet as media support for their marketing activities. It is noteworthy that the NGDOs belonging to the NGO coordinator of Spain Development currently have a Facebook profile of a Twitter account. In this study, a descriptive approach was used. A content analysis was carried out from a qualitative and quantitative perspective. In this way, the communication profiles of the messages were elaborated from the perspectives of the organization and the public. Afterwards, a correlational analysis was performed to verify our hypothesis. The first stage of the process is to identify the units of analysis, as well as the variables to be examined. 1,078 messages on Facebook and 622 ones on Twitter in Red Cross Cadiz, and 760 messages on Twitter and 1,148 messages on Facebook in Caritas Asino de Jerez were identified as study units, making a total of 3,608 posts published in 2015. To encode the variables, numerical indicators and categories have been specified. The variable activity is the number of published messages, and the variable public reaction is the sum of the number of shares plus likes in each post. The variable channel is Twitter or Facebook. In relation to the purpose of the message, the studies of García de Torres y Antoine Farnet, Lovejoy Saxton, and Gideon Saxton were taken into consideration. Based on these studies, the messages were classified as the following: informative, dialogue, and behavior. After exploring a little further and after an exhaustive review of the publications, it was decided to create another classification for the information, dialogue, and behavior messages. So, in this sense, information has the following categories: organization, that refers to organizational, legislative aspects, etc., and social issues, such as human rights, sustainable development objectives, etc. Dialogue has these categories: gratitude, recognition of, for example, the work carried out by the organization or by volunteers, and questions. Behavior are the variables that invite to act, such as events with the words like come or do not miss, etc., and collaboration with all the information necessary to donate, such as the account number, or to improve the visibility of the network. The following variables have been considered for the dimension quality of the messages. Variable format has these categories: only text, text and photo, text and image, text and video, only image, only photo, or only video. Hashtags, number of hashtags, number of mentions, and links. And links has these categories: messages without link, with internal link, or with external link. The variable theme refers to the social topics mentioned in the message. To find out the most appropriate categories, the communication leaders in Red Cross Cadiz and Caritas Asidonia Jerez were interviewed. Then, after examining the database, the next step was to consult two experts in NGDOs. We sent a sample of 100 randomly chosen publications from Facebook and Twitter to them by email. The experts had to catalog according to the proposed categories. In order to decide if these categories were going to be selected, it was necessary to check the agreement between the classifications made by the two experts. As a measure of this, Cohen's kappa coefficient was used. The kappa coefficient value is 0.709, which indicates that the agreement between the two coders is satisfactory according to the scale of the aforementioned researcher. Besides, the level of significance less than 0.05 indicates that the correlation between the two classifications is accepted. Therefore, the theme variable was codified according to the following categories: poverty and social exclusion, employment, international cooperation, emergency, religion, organization, resources, and prevention, only Red Cross. In this section, communication profiles are analyzed according to the purpose of the messages from the point of view of the organization and the public. On the one hand, Figure 1 shows the profile of the organization by the activity. It represents the number of messages published. And on the other hand, we can find the public reaction average according to the purpose type: informative, dialogue, and behavioral. Figure 1 shows these profiles on Facebook and Twitter for Red Cross Cadiz. Two facts can be observed on Twitter. On the one hand, the behavior messages provoke the greatest reaction from the public, even though they are the least ones published. This is relevant because it is not usual to write call-to-action messages on Twitter. And on the other hand, the informative messages are the most published, even though they have the least reaction. In relation to Facebook, the lowest reaction is from behavioral messages. This coincides with the type of publications that are the least published. Furthermore, the greatest reaction for the public on Facebook is related to dialogue messages, but the informative messages are the most published. Related to Cadiz, Caritas Asidonia Jerez, Figure 2 shows that the majority of messages published and the most effective ones are informative, except on Facebook, where the reaction is greater in the behavioral posts. It is observed that the greatest difference is between informative messages and dialogue and behavior ones. This is because of the disproportionate reaction that the messages of Pope Francis have caused. Table 6 presents the topics that organizations publish the most and those that encourage a greater reaction in the public. As we can see in Table 6, the themes published in the messages do not coincide with those with the greatest impact. That is, the organization communication profile according to the theme does not coincide with the public communication profile in the organizations analyzed. It is noteworthy that poverty and social exclusion are the most published topics. This phenomenon coincides with one of the most worrying issues in Spain, and with the most selected area by volunteers. Another significant fact is that the themes that interest the public are different. In the case of Facebook, in Red Cross Cadiz, the greatest reaction from the public is related to prevention issues. This does not happen in Caritas Asidonia Jerez, due to two main reasons. The first is that the Red Cross has risk and emergency management equipment, facilitate and ensure security at events. And the second one is the importance in this organization of talking about culture, sports, or leisure initiatives, like such carnivals, fairs, etc. In these events, volunteers are present, and one of the fundamental concerns of Red Cross is to recognize their work. However, at Caritas Asidonia Jerez, volunteers are not mentioned frequently. In this organization, most of the messages published are religious. One final point to note is that the issue of emergencies is important for the audiences in the organizations analyzed. This is maybe because of people's identification with the victims. Table 7 shows the results related to the quality of the messages. It is noted that the organization communication profiles coincide with the public communication ones on Twitter, in Caritas Asidonia Jerez and Red Cross Cadiz, except in the variable links in Red Cross Cadiz. In the case of Facebook, there are not many coincidences. Two other issues to be highlighted are the following. First, the format with text and photo is the most effective on Twitter in Red Cross Cadiz. And the second, the videos are very popular on Facebook in both organizations. This is because of the Christmas concert video that Caritas Asidonia Jerez published, which got the highest average public reaction per message. Now I'm going to comment the hypothesis results. First, on Twitter. Hypothesis 1. The purpose of the messages influences the public's reaction. This hypothesis is accepted in Caritas and Red Cross. In Caritas, there is a greater reaction from the public in informative messages, and in Red Cross, there is a greater public reaction in behavioral messages. Hypothesis 2. The reaction from the public is different depending on the theme. This hypothesis is accepted in Caritas and Red Cross, and in Caritas, there is a greater reaction from the public in religious messages, and in Red Cross, there is a greater reaction from the public in emergency messages. Hypothesis 3. The reaction from the public is different depending on the format used in the messages. This hypothesis is accepted in Red Cross, but is not accepted in Caritas. In Caritas, there is a greater reaction from the public in messages with only text. And in Red Cross, there is a greater reaction from the public in messages with text and photo. Hypothesis 4. The number of mentions and hashtags influences the reaction from the public. In Caritas, this hypothesis is accepted related to hashtags, but is not accepted related to mentions. There is a greater reaction for the public in messages that have 0 or 1 mentions and 1 or 2 hashtags. Related to Red Cross, this hypothesis is accepted related to mentions, but is not accepted related to hashtags. There is a greater reaction from the public in messages that have 0 or 1 hashtag and 0 or 1 mention. Now I'm going to talk about the hypothesis results on Facebook. Hypothesis 1. The purpose of the messages influences the public's reaction. This hypothesis is accepted in Caritas and Red Cross. In Caritas, there is a greater reaction from the audience in dialogue messages, and in Red Cross, there is a greater reaction from the audience in dialogue messages too. Hypothesis 2. The reaction from the public is different depending on the theme. This hypothesis is accepted in Caritas and Red Cross. In Caritas, there is a greater reaction from the public in emergency messages, and in Red Cross, there is a greater reaction from the public in prevention messages. Hypothesis 3. The reaction from the public is different depending on the format used in the messages. This hypothesis is accepted in Caritas and Red Cross. In Caritas, there is a greater reaction from the public in video messages, and in Red Cross, there is a greater reaction from the public in messages with text and video. In this section, I'm going to comment the main conclusions. We can conclude saying that social digital networks are important marketing tools for NGDOs. According to the results of this research, it can be stated that the organization communication profile for the messages is not the same as the public communication profile. That is, posts on Facebook and Twitter should take into consideration the aspects that cause a greater reaction from the audience. For example, the results indicate that the organizations analyzed use Facebook and Twitter as an information channel and not to encourage conversation. And these findings coincide with the results of other studies, such as Saxton, Sabrowski, and Saxton and Waters. Another aspect to be noted is that behavioral messages generate more responses from the public on Twitter than on Facebook. This is significant because it is not usual these kinds of messages on Twitter, since they require complete information on how to donate or attend an event. On Facebook, conversational messages attract more likes and comments than informational ones, as Saxton and Waters confirmed. However, behavioral messages are not published very often to make a call to action post for volunteers, which is a fundamental resource for NGOs. Text and photo are the most commonly used format by the organizations analyzed in this research, but video caused the largest reaction from the public on Facebook. Regarding hashtags, mentions, and links, it is important to note that they are not very used resources by the analyzed NGDOs and do not encourage audience reaction. However, other studies have demonstrated that hashtags is a strong indicator of retweetability. Sure, and report says that hashtags allow social media users to retrieve relevant information about a topic. We must highlight that poverty and social exclusion are the topics most published by the organizations, but emergencies is the topic that has caused the greatest reaction from the public. A research about the American Red Cross from Briones has the same conclusion and argued that Twitter is considered very useful for engaging and developing relationships with the public for coordinating emergency situations. The importance of influencers should be pointed out because information they transmit generates great impact. Olitsky and Sarowski said that influencers are the most important way of building positive relationships between an organization and their audience. Taking into account these key results, the main contribution of the present research is that our study identifies some key elements that cause a great reaction from the public on Twitter and Facebook. We consider that this information will serve as a basis for future social marketing campaigns and the realization of communication actions by the NGDOs. Another aspect to take into account is the extension of the research to other organizations. Although the proposed approach has been applied in 2 cases from the province of Cadiz in Spain, it could also be used in the analysis of other NGDOs, thus expanding the field of action to other areas, such as regional, national, or international, with the advantage of being quantifiable, that is to say, with metrics that can measure the objectives. Thank you.